at the trailhead, there was 3 horse trailers. And I'm always curious where those folks go. I'm going up this steep hill mostly because I don't expect to see anybody. But man, I hope I don't run into horses up here. Poor deer. But I guess that means there's no horses up here. Well, on Monday, we were up there. See what I mean? Patterson is totally alone. Looking great down there. When we deal with algebra, at least as a theorist, most of the time what we're dealing with is representation theory. The first time they enter into physics context is often in the case of SU2 or the Pauli matrices or some representations of rotations in that regard. And there you never really get a sense of what it would mean for there to be even like a closed subalgebra, because you have the Pauli matrices, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3, like what are you talking about? The first time that this kind of structure ever really manifests is when we go into studying relativistic theory, and oftentimes that's restricted to quantum field theory. When we talk about transformations in the group, SO31, and of course the associated Lie algebra, the representation theory depends on the types of particles that we're considering. So for massive particles, we often talk about Dirac spinors, which are 4-component spinors. We can talk about 2-component spinors as well under the Weil representation, but another way to think about the Weil representation is, of course, that those spinors break into left and right halves, and they're different halves, and they behave differently. As is well known, the weak interactions only interact with spinors of left-handed chirality, and that's interesting. And so when we think about ideals, we can kind of think, or at least how substructure can have a place in the study of physics, we can see a very good example in the theory of electroweak interactions. But I don't want to give the false impression that an ideal has to be a subalgebra completely. It could be that I don't have a good example of something that kind of is not super trivial versus something that's not a full-blown subalgebra. Because the other canonical example that physicists deal with all the time are central extensions of a theory, or just centers in general. So if we think about the Heisenberg algebra, which again, X, P, and H bar is very clearly an ideal in this case because it commutes with everything. One thing that was taught to me in quantum mechanics at a kind of like a random, it was my second pass through quantum mechanics. So it was kind of like a random discussion that the professor kind of started the class with. Eric Broughton, I wonder how he's doing. He said that we define a state in quantum mechanics by considering the spectrum of all the maximal set of mutual commuting operators. And in this context, you usually take the Hamiltonian, right, as your kind of primary thing. And if nothing commutes with the Hamiltonian, then that's it, you've got the energy. Sometimes you have other things like angular momentum, spin. Sometimes you have other things like isospin. And people just kept adding new operators, new symmetries, if you like, before we thought about building those kinds of representations, which are now kind of codified into how we teach particle physics. We had all of these kind of degrees of freedom, these quantum numbers, they call them. And the quantum numbers are in some sense the center of the Lie algebras that describe our world. The items in the Lie algebra that kind of commute with everything. So those things count as an ideal. And again, their spectrum, their existence is related to how we label physical reality. But that's kind of the way math is, right? Everything looks artificial until you use it for something. Let's hope we don't get run over by a cyclist. This trail gets a little burly. Oh man, I love running. My goodness, what a day. And I still have to give the lecture too. Next time we are going to talk about, what are we going to talk about? Product algebras. Hey. There go the horses.